Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grace Covenant Chats. Brought to you, whoa, that was a big pause. Brought to you by Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. I'm your host, Caleb Watt, here with my fantastic co-host, P. Doug, or Pastor Doug for short. Pastor Doug, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Caleb.
Today we have, I guess, the first of our topical talks, right? Or discussions, I should say. Let's slow a talk and more a discussion. And our first topic is talking about faith. Right, within the church specifically, but I mean, we all want to learn how to talk about our faith in every context. But more specifically for me, why I thought it was an interesting topic to start with is because, like, I feel like even, like, it's like the whole context of this is in and of itself, right? Because I think even in our conversation so far, it's like clearly we don't agree on everything, but we still are encouraged by one another's faith. And, well, I guess I am greatly encouraged by your faith and your thoughts a lot of the times, right? So I think it's an interesting discussion to have for a greater church where there's like so many different people within the church itself. So those were my thoughts on why I wanted to do this. What were some of yours?
Yeah, so I thought this is a good topic to talk about because a few weeks ago we had a message where we talked about discipleship. We talked about how God's heart for us is to seek wholeness. Wholeness is an all around type of discipleship, a discipleship of every part of our lives. And I mentioned that the context of discipleship is the church, right? Discipleship doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen on your own. It happens within the church. And specifically, discipleship is a relational process. Obviously, firstly, in our relationship with Jesus, who is the one who ultimately disciples us. He's the one we follow. But it also happens through relationship with one another in the church. Again, discipleship happens through relationship, and the context of that is within the church. But the issue is a lot of people don't know how to have these kind of conversations about how to actually spur one another on to grow, right? Spur one another on to love and good works. We put on a lot of masks, and that's a complaint I often hear when people talk about the church, is that they feel that everyone comes in with masks, with things that are sort of filtering how they look at one another. And then what that leads to is conversation that's kind of surface level, superficial. And people want to know, how do you break out of that? Because it's hard though, right? If everyone is sort of wearing these masks, everyone just sort of skirting around the bigger things they're feeling around their own faith, then yeah, like how do you break that? And I think that's a big question I've heard from a lot of people.
I agree. I feel like I've come across that like in my experience in the church too, right? Like I will put on the mask or I will be talking to someone else and it's like, well, we're not really making a lot of ground here, right? Or like, I want to connect deeper, but I can't, and I don't know how, right? I think how I want to start the discussion is perhaps a little bit more like, I don't want to say basic, right? But like, I just want to talk about like, what's the heart behind, right, wanting to have these sorts of conversations, which you've already touched on a little bit, but like, why do we really, as a church, why is it necessary and why is it vital for us to be able to maybe not just talk to a few close friends, right? But be able to also share our faith with others within the greater congregation.
Yeah, the reason we need it is because without it, we're going to be very hindered in our discipleship to Jesus because we're all trying to do it on our own. And what I know for myself is I can't do it on my own. I can think back just throughout my life, all the relationships, the friendships I've had with people who have really contributed to my faith. And those relationships wouldn't have been able to get there if it weren't for the deeper conversations that we were able to have, where I was able to share things going on in my life. I was allowing others to speak into my life. If those had been just superficial relationships, I would have missed out on those growth opportunities. And just something that really stands out to me, a story in my own life. I remember I had a close friend, and over time we started to grow a little more distant. But in my heart, I'm like, oh, why doesn't this person ever reach out to me? Like, oh, did they forget about me? They're just moving on with their life. Like, I just wish that person would reach out. And then I heard later when I finally did talk to that person that he felt the same exact way. He's like, oh, why isn't Doug going to reach out to me? And I feel like that's the reality with a lot of us when it comes to our relationships with others in the church, particularly like spiritual things. We think, why doesn't the other person ever ask like, deeper questions, ask about my life? But they're probably thinking the same thing. It just takes one person to break that ice and to reach out and to speak. Because I think reality is many of us want those conversations.
Right.
We're just all waiting for the other person to make the first move. But the challenge is, can we be the person that makes that first move to initiate those deeper conversations?
Right. Interesting. I feel like then as a pastor, right, of a congregation, do you find yourself frequently being the one who initiates with people? Because I'd imagine that a lot of people aren't used to sharing, but like when they're going to the pastor, asking for advice, asking for wisdom, do you find that you're the one who initiates a lot of that now?
Well, it's interesting because I wouldn't want to be the one, obviously, and I also wouldn't want to be the one that's the center of all the spiritual like growth type of conversations people are having.
Right.
Obviously, as a pastor, I want to pastor and shepherd the church, but people need to be in relationship with each other as well. It can't be all like focus on me or the other staff. Like we can't be the ones that do all the work of discipling the whole church, right? It's a together type of thing. Obviously, we have roles in the work of discipleship, important roles, but it's a whole church type of thing, and we can't be the center of it. But the reality is people do feel more comfortable reaching out to me because I'm a pastor, and therefore I am the one who you're supposed to have spiritual conversations with, and that's good, but we need to do it with one another as well. That's such an important part of our discipleship, and if we miss out on that, we're missing out on so much just growth opportunity.
So then what do you feel like are like some of the biggest hindrances for people to begin to take off the mask, to begin to open up to other people, their peers, or and stuff like that?
I think the biggest fear is fear of being judged. I think a lot of us wear these masks because we think, oh, if the other people in the church knew the real me, they wouldn't want me here. They would think I don't belong. But the truth is, I think all of us feel that. Even I, like as a pastor, I feel that sometimes. I feel like people don't really know the real me, and if they knew the real me, they would not want me to be their pastor, right? And we all carry these sort of thoughts and these fears of judgment. And the reality is, though, we're all sort of on the same playing field. None of us are perfect. We can't expect ourselves to be perfect, and we can't expect others to only accept us if we're perfect. I think people in the church are more than willing to accept others and accept their flaws because we all can see in our own selves that we're deeply flawed and we need relationship.
So then it almost like, for me, right, begs the question of like, okay, it's great and all that I go out there or like someone else is able to go out there and share. But then how do I prepare to receive what they're sharing, right? Because like if I am coming in judgmentally receiving what they're saying, then that contributes to the problem. So how do I prepare? I guess we're starting to move into a little bit more of the practical discussion here, right? And I do have a few notes written for like a few issues that I thought about or I've come across, and maybe you have too. But like I guess this is maybe a good framework to begin with. Is like, how do I prepare to receive when someone else is sharing, and then I guess we can flip that around too. When I am about to share, how do I prepare myself so that I can do so freely, right, and without fear?
Well, I think in order to receive it, we have to really tell ourselves, like, I won't judge this person, because who are we to judge when we ourselves know that we are flawed and we have our own sin and brokennesses that we try to cover up. And if we would judge another person, like, who are we to do so when we are the same way? The Bible alludes to that frequently about this idea of judging. Like, who are we to judge? Judge not lest you be judged. And so I think that's really part of it, is we have to recognize that we're all in this together. We're all on the same playing field. And we have to have a heart to say, if I want someone to care for me and walk with me, I need to walk with others as well. Because faith relationships are two-way. They're not meant to ever be just one way. There's a two-way thing. And so if we expect someone to walk with us, we should be willing to walk with them as well.
I like that. So then let's get into my list of things that I've thought about when I was preparing for this. One of the first demographics, or like I feel like groups that sometimes come across like struggles, right, when sharing about faith, is the younger believer with an older believer. I think I've found that sometimes with a younger believer, they'll feel like, I don't really have anything to contribute to this conversation, even if it's not about life, but like about like, anything faith related. It's like, oh, I don't have anything to say, right? Or the older believer sometimes will be like, well, I don't want to say too much or explain too much or divulge too much, because it's like, then am I like overbearing? Am I coming off as prideful, right? So how would you I suppose like advise like both of these like people like to approach a conversation
Yeah.
about faith and their experiences.
Well, the church is a beautiful place where you can have people of different walks of life, different stages of their growth, and we can all learn from one another. First Timothy paints this like beautiful picture of the elder men and women looking after like the younger men and women in the church, and really that should be happening. And in my own life, when I was a new believer here at GCC as a college student, I was so blessed by some of the older believers. When I say older, they were only like 2 or 3 years older than me because I was like a sophomore, they were seniors. But still, to me, that was a huge difference. But the fact that they cared for me, were able to just ask me how I was doing, check in on me, that made a huge difference. And for those of you, in the church who are in a place where you have people who may be younger than you, I would encourage you just to extend just a little bit of like welcome to some of the younger believers. Maybe just check in them once in a while, ask them how they're doing, because it means a lot. Like it meant so much to me in my early growth to know that there are people who wanted to care for me and walk with me who were a few steps ahead. And so if you're a senior, care for the younger, the underclassmen, the younger believers. If you're a young adult, maybe check in on college students here and there. It doesn't have to be like long-term, like meeting up on this like regular weekly or monthly basis, but just checking in can go a long way. And for the younger believers, I would encourage you, if you really value, someone who's maybe a little older speaking into your life, just go out and ask. Because I think a lot of older believers would love to be able to speak into the life of someone who's younger. And so if you're younger and really feel like you're missing that, just ask. Like college student, just ask the young adult. Say, hey, can we meet up maybe every once in a while? Can we maybe talk a little bit and just you share with me what's going on in your life, your own growth, just how like Jesus is working in your life, some of the challenges you faced. And, I think that just sort of those little things like that, those little relationships make a huge difference in the life of the church.
Yeah, it sounds like there's like a lot of intentionality involved, right?
Yes.
With a lot of these things.
For sure, yeah, intentionality is required. But obviously, there's also some of the unintentional. So when you bump into each other, right? On a Sunday, don't just talk to the people that you are comfortable talking to. Maybe talk to someone new, someone who maybe isn't as connected. There's little things that we can do as well. We don't have to make everything this big, intentional, like meet up week by week thing. There's the little things, and those actually, in some ways, can make a bigger difference, right? If someone feels disconnected from the church, just seeing someone who takes the time to go and talk to them after church on a Sunday, to have a real conversation, not just like a superficial thing. That can really mean a lot to that person.
I agree. Well, moving on to the next thing, let's talk about sharing about experiences, because I feel like this bullet point that I wrote down, I think what I had more in mind was this idea that sometimes we're in drastically different places with someone else, right? And the verse that came to mind when I was writing, bullet pointing this, was it found in Romans, where Paul writes, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep." So in talking about our experiences, like for example, if I'm going through a really rough season, but someone's going through a really great season, how do we have conversations where it's like, I can simultaneously like rejoice with you as you're going through your great season, but you can simultaneously weep with me as I'm going through my drought, my low points, right?
I mean, it's challenging because it's hard. We don't want to feel like we're faking it. But I think what it comes down to is like you genuinely care about that person, because I think for most of us in the relationships that matter the most to us, whether like a deep, deep friend or a family member who's like really close to us, when we see something that they're going through, whether they're going through something good or bad, despite whatever we may be feeling, I feel like we're often able to meet them where they are because they mean a lot to us. I can think of, just in my own family, if my wife like is celebrating something, even if I'm not in a great mood, I would be able to celebrate with her because she means so much to me. And I want to be there with her through this thing she's experiencing. And so what it comes down to is, do we actually value the relationships that we have in the church then? Are we able to let go of ourselves at times to meet someone where they are, to rejoice when they're rejoicing or to weep when they're weeping, despite what we may be feeling in the time? But again, relationships are still a two-way thing. And my hope is that that person then would be able to meet you where you are as well. And so there should be a mutuality to that. But again, it comes down to, do you value though that relationship? Because if we don't really value it, it's going to be hard for us to want to do that. But when we truly value relationship, we're willing to let go of ourselves for the sake of it. And that'd be my hope, that we really value the friendships that we have within the church.
Then next question or next thought that I had, or category of thought, was different contexts for sharing faith or talking about faith. And by context, I specifically mean like a one-on-one context, right? A small group context and a large group, like with the whole congregation. So like, I guess the one-on-ones happen with like meetups, and small groups happen with family groups. And maybe you would say here at GCC, the large group things would be like sharing testimony, maybe before baptism or during like some of the events. But like, how would you advise someone to approach sharing their faith in each one of those situations?
Well, actually, I would think the best starting place for all of it is within family group, because it's in family group where you can share with a smaller community, but it's also in family group where you can develop deeper, even like one-on-one friendships. Obviously, it can happen outside of family group, but I feel like family group is a great starting place for that. It's in family group where you can learn to even share. I know for me, like my first family group as a new believer was a place where I started to feel comfortable sharing about my own life, what I was sort of wrestling with in my faith. And that gave me the ability then to do that in an individual context as well. And so I think the biggest encouragement for people is to start in family group, like actually participate and open up in family group. Like lay out everything, right? Because that makes it awkward, right? Like, I'm like, well, this is my struggle, struggle this. Like, then people will be like, oh man, what do we do? But with wisdom, start to open up and share, be involved, not just because your body is there, physically there. Be involved because you're like mentally, you're spiritually present with the group. You're opening up and sharing. And I think that will open up many doors to being able to have deeper conversations with people, both in that family group and then also even at an individual level. Because who knows, maybe someone after the group will come up to you and be like, hey, I'm actually going through something similar. Can we meet up and talk about this? And I think, that'd be great if those kind of things happen.
I'd have like one more context, right, that I'm thinking of, which is that where there's like a lot of differences in thought, whether that's like cultural or like theological or like political. Like, how would you navigate a situation with that? Because it sometimes feels like it is a hindrance. Like, I don't want to speak about something that someone might disagree with, or that I know someone will disagree with, or say an opinion that is contrary or contradicts what they're saying.
Yeah, that's obviously a very important question, because we live in a world where we're so used to dividing ourselves up based upon all these different things. We like to sort of shield ourselves into our little groups and divisions. And, that obviously creates things like echo chambers and such. But the church was always meant to be different. It is a church where the wall of hostility between two people is broken, so that in Christ we can be one, right? There's no longer male or female, or, slave or free. The idea, right? That these walls that once separated people are meant to be broken, such that we all are participants within Jesus, within the church. And so if we let our divisions be a hindrance to us having a relationship with others, what we're basically saying is that our allegiance to this or that thing is more important than our allegiance to Christ. And at that point, it really becomes idolatry. We're saying this thing is more important than what Jesus says, and the way he wants his body to look. And so again, this goes back to my question I asked before, like, do you value the relationships you have in the church? Because if we value our like political ideology or our, or whatever type of division more than our allegiance like to Jesus, then, more than our relationship with others, then that's sort of touching upon idolatry. And so again, do you value relationships in the church? Because we can really learn. We can learn from brushing up against people who may think differently than us. It's so easy to other the person, right? To otherize the person who is not like us, and then to make assumptions about them. But when we have a relationship with people who might look or think differently than us, have different experiences than us, it challenges us. Right. It challenges our core assumptions, and ultimately it can grow us. And that's why I think it's critical that we have those type of relationships. And the church is a great place, because it's in the church we can trust, or at least hope, that there'll be a level of kindness, there'll be a level of grace that is shown to one another, even if we do disagree on certain things. And so I would encourage us to be willing to have conversations with people who may think differently than us. Perhaps we'll find ourselves growing through those conversations.
Well, thank you very much for that response. I think that is a very pertinent thought, right? Like, what do we value more, and what do we ultimately almost like vest our hope in, right? But we are coming up against the end of our time. despite this being a topic that I feel like I feel like we've only brushed the surface, and there's like all these like practical things that you could ask about, right? And maybe it would be more helpful or less helpful. I know I'm a person who, as we've discussed before, I need like step by step, like how to, okay, so what do I do here? What do I do there, right? But I do think that this is a very nice groundwork, right? For like, how do I talk about my faith with other people in the church, in my community, who are part of the body that I'm a part of now, right? So do you have any concluding thoughts or last
my
comments?
closing thought is, again, this is just so important to have real, like, deep, meaningful relationships in the church. Discipleship happens in those things. In my own walk with Christ as a young believer, just being able to meet with like other brothers when I was in college, it made such a huge impact on me. And I would hate for people to deny themselves these ways to grow. By having these type of relationships. It's so easy for us to get so caught up in our lives, caught up in our school, our work, or whatever, and then our relationships become just more a means of escape. Like we go and hang out with friends and things like that, which is good, obviously, to an extent. But can we have meaningful conversation, meaningful relationships where we can share and speak into each other's lives? Because that will really shape and mold the church in really deep ways. And that's my hope for us. That's my hope for our community, that we would have real, meaningful relationships.
Right. That's a great hope to have, P. Doug. And that's my hope too. But we are at the end of our time. So thank you very much for tuning in to this week's episode of Grace Covenant Chats. If you don't know who we are Grace Covenant Church here in U City, Philadelphia. You can go check us out at ucity.gracecovenant.net. Get connected to family group. Come to Sunday service. It's at 10. And hopefully we're back in Meyerson most of the time.
The rest of the fall, we're in Meyerson.
Rest of the fall, we're in Meyerson. Let's go. So do check us out, and we'll see you guys next time.